everybody. My name is Taylor Myrie, and I'm a history and political science major here at Syracuse University, minoring in atrocity studies and social justice education. And today I'll be presenting on Roma and the Holocaust, the politics of memorialization. So I wanted to establish a trigger warning before we start today. We're going to be dealing with a lot of very traumatic source material, including genocide and murder. So there's going to be some graphic imagery that we're going to deal with. So if you need to walk out of the room, feel free to do so. So I wanted to start my presentation off with a quote by a Romani writer and poet named Karoli Vary, who's wrote a lot of prominent literature that has to do with the Romani Holocaust. He says, "As yet no memorial has been raised to the Gypsy victims of the Holocaust. No one has yet asked the forgiveness of Gypsy survivors or offered any form of compensation for crippling their bodies and souls." So, in the Holocaust, the narrative has been primarily around the Jewish narrative of suffering in the Holocaust, but there hasn't been a lot of research done on the subgroups that have suffered greatly within the Holocaust. This includes the Romani people, LGBTQ folks, disabled folks, and also Afro-Germans that suffered during the Holocaust at great rates, but their stories are largely unheard. Roma suffering during the Holocaust is also extremely under-researched within my field, and so I wanted to contribute to that in some way, and this has led to the lack of memorialization of the Romani people within Europe, despite a lot of the trials and tribulations that they have dealt with in history and also today. So the purpose of my research is to explore how the exclusion of the Romani people and the narrative of the Holocaust contributes to present-day violence that they suffer. And so I wanted to start with my topic glossary for a few terms that we need to establish before moving on with the presentation. So the first is the farhimos, which means the cutting up, fragmentation, and destruction. This is what the Romani reference the Holocaust as, so that's how they utilize it in their vernacular. So I'll be utilizing Romani Holocaust and farhimos interchangeably throughout the presentation. And establishing a definition for genocide is extremely important because the definitions vary greatly. So the definition I'm working with is the deliberate destruction in whole or in part by a government or its agents of a racial, sexual, religious, tribal, or political minority. It can involve not only mass murder, but also starvation, forced deportation, and political, economic, and biological subjugation. Genocide involves three major components: ideology, technology, bureaucracy, / organization, and historiography means the product of historical writing, a body of historical literature. And so let's start off with speaking about who are the Romani people. Many of you may know them as Gypsies, but that is a derogatory term to reference Romani people. They identify themselves as Roma, so that's the term I utilize in my presentation. They migrated from Northern Europe 1,500 years ago to Northern India, to Europe 1,500 years ago. They are considered a nomadic people, but this is mostly due to the fact that European nations wouldn't allow them to settle, so they were forcibly migrated throughout Europe. They experienced over 500 years of slavery and displacement on the European continent, and also they're considered to be a rootless people. And they're historically stereotyped as criminals, beggars, and involved in unsavory employment. And also they're the largest minority population in Europe, at about 11 million people in present day. So I wanted to start off with the beginning of the Romani Holocaust. This actually started prior to the Nazis coming to power in Germany. It started with the German state establishing a law in 1926 that restricted the Romani movement and also required Romani people to register with the German government so that they can keep track of them. And this program was bolstered once the Nazis came to power, and they eventually collected over 33,524 case files on Romani people that lived within Germany. And so, which constituted about 90% of the Romani population in Germany. And Romani were also subjected to the Nuremberg laws, which are laws that were applicable to the Jewish population, also the Afro-German population in Germany, which restricted where you could go, what employment you could have, who you could even sleep with, who you could marry, etc. And so, in 1935, the very first concentration camp for Romani people was established, and this is well before the start of World War II, which started in 1939. So you can see this was 4 years prior to the start of the war. And so this was established in Ehrenfeld, Germany. And after 1936, the Romani were beginning to be deported to different concentration camps in Ravensbrück, Dachau, Odenwald, and Mauthausen. And these are all concentration camps that were within Germany's borders. And at these camps, mass murder took place euthanasia, a lot of raping of women, and specifically experimentation on Romani people because doctors were fascinated with just the different phenotypes of Romani people and also the plethora of twin children that Roma produced. So they did a lot of experimentation on them. So they suffered greatly within these camps. On October 1st, 1936, the Nazi leader, Heinrich Himmler, constituted an official extermination order against the Romani people, which means that there was an actual move to exterminate them completely, which is extremely important because there's a debate on if they were targeted or if they weren't. So these are photos within the concentration camp of Romani victims. And these are the corpses of Romani victims that were found in Jasenovac concentration camp. And so normally it's that they died from shooting or from gassing in gas chambers. And so the estimated death toll of the Romani people is between 300,000 and 500,000 people. But this statistic is extremely debated due to the lack of archival evidence and also the lack of interest in researching the Romani population. So it actually ranges from 200,000 to 1.5 million of people dying. So we really don't know what the real statistic, but what we do know is 90% of the German Romani population did get exterminated during the Holocaust. And so I want to talk about the historiography of the Frarhimos. So directly after World War II, since the Romani weren't seen as a class of people that were affected or targeted in the Holocaust, there was absolutely no research done, so no archival research to look into that, or any testimonials from Romani people because people weren't interested in researching the group. And also the historical discourse just completely excluded them. In addition to this, since the Romani people were spread out across Europe, a lot of them were unable to reconnect with one another because a lot of families died within the Holocaust, so there was a complete decimation of culture and things of that nature. And so the Romani were left out of discourse during the Nuremberg trials in the 1940s where Nazi leaders were punished, but they were not punished specifically for the crimes they committed against the Romani people. And also the talks of reparations that took place in the 1950s completely left Romani people out of the conversation. And prominent Holocaust scholars and figures completely ignored Roma suffering. This includes Holocaust survival Elie Wiesel and researcher Seymour Siegel, who basically said that Jewish suffering was based on race, and that wasn't the same for the Romani. And so this exclusivist history had a few tenets and arguments. The first being the number of victims are incomparable to that of the Jewish victims, therefore it's just not the same thing. The other being that there apparently is no documentation that talks about targeting Romani people, but as I said before, it is documented that Heinrich Himmler actually had a specific extermination order against Romani people. And also, they argue that Roma weren't excluded based off of race, but that it was due to their asocial behavior, which is an awful stereotype that was made against Romani people. And so they definitely struggled for recognition during the Holocaust. First was the hunger protest that was conducted by Sinti and Romani activists in 1980 at the former Dachau camp, where many Romani people died. And also in the German Sinti activist sit-in at the University Archives in Germany, which is actually an archive that had a lot of archival evidence that has to do with the Romani Holocaust, but they were denied access to these archives because it gave grounds to compensation for reparations, and that was over 20,000 files. And also the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum was established in 1979, but did not give voice or consideration to prominating the Romani suffering story until 1985. And then because of this, Romani activism actually did lead to some recognition of the struggle, but not enough by this point. And so leading on to politics of memory, because of the exclusivist Holocaust historiography, by the time people became interested in actually researching Romani struggle, which is the 1990s, a lot of the survivors had already passed away. And so that leads us to not being able to tell the story through the lens of Romani people, and instead we have to go through archival evidence with testimonies of Jewish victims, but this is an issue because there was biases within the two groups towards one another because there was ethnic conflict. So a lot of the testimonials via Jewish people about Romani are very negative, so that doesn't really present the story holistically in the view of Romani people. And also, it excludes them from the public narrative, which then leads to less memorialization for them and less respect for the struggle. And also, because of the exclusion, it has led to public marginalization in present day, which has led to denied access in housing, education, and access to jobs. And so I wanted to do a case study about Lety concentration camp, which was a concentration camp I had the chance to visit in Poland last year. So I want to start off with a quote from a Romani Holocaust survivor named Mr. Klok. He says, "Our other relatives were not so lucky. Some perished in the camp near the village of Lety, and most in Hitler's concentration camp at Auschwitz. There's a pig farm at Lety now. How could they have allowed that?" So Lety concentration camp was actually established prior to Nazis moving into the Czech Republic. So the Czech government actually established this Roma concentration camp in order to keep asocial Roma outside of the Czech society. And so about 1,300 Romani prisoners circulated throughout the camp, but between 300 and 350 prisoners perished and were exterminated at this camp due to illness, starvation, and overwork. And so when the Nazis came in, they took over the camp and then began deporting a lot of the prisoners to Auschwitz and Dachau and Treblinka, which they ultimately ended up dying. So there were no survivors from Lety concentration camp specifically. And so during the Soviet Union, there was a pig farm that was established and built on the land of Lety, although people knew it was a mass grave for Romani people. And there was a lot of protests since 1976 that encouraged them to take the pig farm off of the land, but the Czech government refused until 2018, which is when I visited. So it's only been 1 year since the pig farm was removed, but it's been there for over 40 years. And a lot of people complain that when they visit the memorial site, they can still smell the stench of the pigs and not be able to focus on the memorial. And also for a very long time, there was no kind of placard or anything that explained what the site was. And the Czech government made concerted efforts to cover up their involvement within transporting Romani people into this camp. And so Romani began to reclaim their own historiography and their own identity in terms of the Roma Holocaust. So they established holidays such as Romani Resistance Day, which is a day where Romani people stood up to the Nazis within Auschwitz concentration camp. They also established Roma Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is on August 2nd, and also established the Roma Futurism movement, which is imagining different futures through literature that don't have to do with suffering. And also there are Roma activist resistance organizations like the European Roma Rights Center and the Roma and Open Society Foundation. And also Roma have begun creating their own memorials. For example, the Rain of Tears, which was exhibited in both Budapest and also France. And so this is my research design. I wanted to ask 3 main questions in my research. And the first being, why is there a lack of urgency to memorialize the Roma Holocaust? The second being, does it have anything to do with their race or ethnicity? And the third being, does the lack of memorialization and education on the Romani attribute to continued violence? And so my hypothesis is the Romani are not included in memorialization of the Holocaust due to being part of an undesirable minority, race, ethnicity that has been discriminated against in Europe for centuries. And so my research methods, I'm doing a qualitative research method that has to do with a literature review of primary sources, secondary and film sources, and I'm going to do a textual analysis of the literature review that I have already compiled and add some more literature to that. And also field research, which I conducted in Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Poland last year, where I visited Lety concentration camp and also Auschwitz. And then my project status as of now, I started my research actually in fall of 2018, where I did conduct the field research, and I visited different memorials and burial grounds, and I also wrote a term paper called The Forhimos, The Forgotten Holocaust, so that was kind of the inspiration for continuing this research. And this summer, I curated sources for my literature review. I secured a mentor, Professor Julia White, who's an associate professor in education, who actually directly works with the Romani population in Slovakia and in Hungary, so she's a perfect mentor for this project. And also have a research proposal that I've attended the University of Buffalo McNair Conference and learned a lot more on how to have good presenting skills and also bring my project alive. And so my project timeline right now is in September. I'll complete curating sources and begin writing my publication with my mentor. From October to November, I'll continue writing publication and complete and send in for publishing for the Gypsy Lore Journal, which is a really popular academic journal in Romani studies, so I really hope I'm able to be published. And from December to January, look for additional places to publish and also revise my work and probably continue on and add a few more chapters in my free time. And from January to May, hopefully be published by that point and participate in the McNair Research Symposium that takes place in May, so come back and see how this has developed next semester. And I would like to acknowledge Ms. Christabel Sheldon, who's super dope and helped me a lot with my project, Ms. Lauren Malloy, who was not able to be here today, Professor Thorley and Professor Martinez for inspiring me and also helping me think of things and framing things differently, and Professor Julia White, who has agreed to be my faculty mentor, and my McNair gang. Love you guys. And yeah, so these are we're excited. And does anyone have any questions? Thank you.